our historic buildings and structures are the fabric of our community here. I love history. I was a history teacher. I was a history major. I love preserving. I worked in archives in the past. So this is something that's very important to me. So I think that as a member of the select board, one of the things that we want to, with respect to infrastructure, I think our objective should be on repair rather than replace. When possible, repair rather than replace. I know we have an aged fire station. We have other aged buildings like Town Hall that was renovated a few years ago. I mean, we need to put the emphasis on repairing these structures rather than replacing these structures. I think that's both more economically feasible and economically practical, and it helps preserve the historic integrity of the town. I believe that coming up at town meeting this Saturday certainly is, I believe, warrant Article 11 about the Bromfield House. I believe that should be preserved. I would hate to see such a historic building be removed or possibly destroyed. I believe it should be sold if possible and if practical, with restrictive covenants, and possibly maybe placed within the historic district. I think we're custodians of this town as members of the select board and as volunteers and as residents. And it is our charge to keep these historic buildings functional and preserve them. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. McBee.
Hi, I think it's critical that we protect these historic structures in town center as well. We have the old library, which is on our seal. It's on our flag. When you go to the State House and you look for the flag for the town of Harvard, it is the old library. So I think it's critical to maintain that building. And, you know, we have a warrant article coming up at town meeting and at the ballot as well for replacing the roof of that building. And I think it's very important to make sure that we don't let it degrade any further. As far as the other building in town, which I think isn't declared historic, but it's been, I mean, it has a long history in the town, which is the superintendent's house next to the elementary school. I think we really need to make sure that if that building is going to be retained, that we're able to maintain it, which has been a challenge for the old library, town hall, fire station, many other buildings in town. It's difficult to balance maintaining and repairing these buildings at the level that we need to. It's nice that we now have a maintenance person for the schools that is helping them maintain the new building and the existing buildings. And as well as we have a new building inspector who is also serving as I forget the title exactly, but he's also making sure that our town buildings are being maintained, which hopefully will help us going forward from having large costs incurred for major repairs if we can keep things maintained going forward. But it has been a challenge. I cede the rest of my time to Mr. Mclaughlin.
Thanks,
I'm done.
Sure. Mclaughlin.
I get it wrong half the time myself. So I think that it's a challenging question. And I think that the answer is obviously not what we've done in the past, because that hasn't worked for us. So looking at root cause, agree with the other candidates that we need to do something now to stabilize. And we very importantly need to maintain from here forward. And that's going to require a dedicated facilities department that has their eyes on that maintenance, establishing a baseline, determining where the deficits are right now structurally with those buildings, outlining what those costs are going to be, and making that a priority for the town. That's not just based on whether those facilities draw revenue for us. That's a financial concern, but it's not what makes Harvard unique. It's not what we love about it and what drew us here, and what actually has monetized meaning, I'm sure, in ways that we can't quantify, directly dollar for dollar for what those buildings do or do not bring in. So I think it's critical, and I think that it's going to require additional cost and for us to dedicate some resources that can put forth the time to establish what's needed and then maintain it from here forward. And with that, I'll concede the rest of my time.
Thank you. Next question. The planning board is proposing changes to the commercial district on Air Road. What effect would those changes have on tax revenues? Ms. McBee.
Hi. Yeah, they have a warrant article for the Air Road project. The idea being if we could come up with some sort of what they call a form-based code, then the town residents would have more say into what happens. The fear is that as soon as somebody ties into the Devon's water and sewer, all of a sudden it's going to explode down there. Our current zoning doesn't seem to be bringing us what we want. It's also partly because we don't have town water or any kind of sewer there, and each building needs to have its own. But we don't want to have this explosive growth happen without having some sort of better zoning for that district, especially for the folks who live on Air Road or abut Air Road, like Harvard Green residents. They really want to make sure that what gets developed there is going to be something that they want, and as well as the rest of the residents in town. We also want to be careful that we don't draw in, traffic that we don't want. Like, we've had people, when I was on the planning board, there was a gas station that wanted to go in there, which is not allowed with our current zoning, is not proposed in any new zoning, but there are things like that coming and looking at our town, and other services that support long, big trucks, semi-tractor trailers, because they're all going into Devon's, unfortunately, down Air Road. So there were businesses that wanted to come to town to support them. Luckily, there was one that I think is not there anymore, but we don't want to draw those types of businesses. We want to draw the businesses that folks want in town. So the warrant article that they have proposed is to try to get more say from the community into developing a form-based code where you can say, we're okay with this size building here and that size building there, have some trails here, so developers will know what is acceptable to the town and we can get what we want here. Thanks.
Thank you. Mr. Mclaughlin. Whoops, you're still on mute.
Yeah, so I think we hit it at the same time. Yeah, I think the revenue question is a very important one. What I'm most interested in seeing is an objective, whether that objective is, 1 year, 5 year, 10 year, all of the above, and an outlier years. What are we going to get from whatever we do for Air Corridor? So before we go into zoning, before we go into any fiscal analysis on what kind of revenues we're going to achieve, what do we need to get from this very scarce commercial C zoning area? We don't have much of that. We're going to have a facilities deficit forever, as long as we decide to be a bedroom community, which I hope we do. So we need to make the best use we can of it. So I would like to establish very first and foremost, what are we going to get? What is our objective and what we're going to try to achieve from a net perspective, not from a gross perspective. So how much revenue a grocery store brings in versus the costs associated with a living area for seniors, all of that is getting into the tactile. What we need to first do is define what we want to get from it. Then what we can do is decide or give forward our town hall to come up with the options, and if consultants are needed and so forth, to determine what the net result of those options are going to be. I would like to see that a symbiotic relationship come out of this village concept, where we have farm to table restaurants working with possibly boutique inns that give us room excise tax, working with possibly a farmer's market that all drives interest in business to our farmers and other folks around here in the town. And at the same result, we collectively realize true net tax revenue from that helps offset our other deficits. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Cavellis.
Yeah, the question is, what effect would those changes have on tax revenues? I mean, hopefully to stabilize it and diversify it. I mean, that has to be the objective of this plan, is to diversify the tax base. 90+% of the taxes raised by the town come from the residential property tax levy. That is simply untenable and unsustainable. It needs to be diversified. The Ayer Road C District has been in the master plan for development, some limited development, for I believe about 50 years. So I think that the proposal needs to be, and I do support some form-based code in a walkable district, not sort of plaza scattered, haphazard, it'll snap, type of district. And I think that we need to put our goal on diversifying the tax base. And there are, I think, some mixed use development there would be beneficial. Some senior housing there would be beneficial. We have Bowers Brooks and Foxgloves. We need more senior housing. I think some senior housing there as our town begins to age and continues to age is going to be needed, and that might be a place for it. But the question is what effect. It needs to be diversified. We cannot continue to sustain economic stability and growth with 90+% of our revenue being levied, raised from the residential tax base. It's just simply, you can't do it. It's unsustainable. At some point, there's going to have to be, it's going to be, issues are going to have to be addressed, and I'd rather address them sooner rather than later. So that's the goal there. The goal is to sort of diversify the tax base and try to provide some relief to homeowners. Thank you.
Sorry. Next question. What are your ideas for increasing town revenues without increasing property taxes? Mr. Mclaughlin.
Well, we do have a very limited amount of commercial C space, right? And it was, I think, back in like 1986 that we gave up the only industrial zoning that we had. So we don't have a lot of options besides residential. And to Richard's point, we're at 95% right now, dependency on residential. So it really does come down to air, and it comes down to Devon's. So air is, of course, forefront with us right now and has had the most investment. I wouldn't want to see us backtrack on that. However, I don't want to see tax revenues just for the sake of, when costs could offset those and put us back. So do we really want to make a commercial area, develop it, and then not realize really what we had hoped as far as those revenues and the diversification from it? So first and foremost is establish the objective. How much profitability from a business perspective are we going to get from what we put in there on Air Road? And again, I would hope that we look at those things that are low cost, high profit, and that would, I don't want to use the word hotel, but I just did, but boutique inns, places where you could get room excise tax, does not put a huge service cost load on our town, does not create a lot of traffic, but then can work in that symbiotic relationship with restaurants that are farm to table, with the farmers market, and those things that work together to further drive interest to our farms here, our existing farms and farmers in our community, towards the Fruitlands Museum, towards our other great assets here in the town. So that's where I think our focus should be for tax revenues.
Thank you, Mr. Cabellas.
Thank you. I mean, really, the two places that we have to look again is at Ayer Road, and in 12 years, we have a serious question to answer with respect to Devon's. So with respect to Ayer Road, again, this has been in the master plan for about 50 years. I believe some limited development there could benefit and diversify the tax base. I think one of the things that you have to be careful about is what goes in there, because if you bring in certain types of businesses, it's going to increase the need for public services, which is going to offset any growth that you're going to have as far as the tax levy. So if we need to bring in certain types of mixed use types of businesses or development, that's going to require increased public services through increased police and fire, I mean, that's just going to offset any growth that we have, and therefore we're going to have the net same problem. So that really, what goes in there is very, very important. But really, Ayer Road is where you need to diversify and try to diversify right now. And we have to keep in mind the rural aspect of the town. I love the town and the rural aspect of it, and it needs to be complementary. I love the thought of, farmers coming to market and having farm stands and things of that nature, which can complement the town, raise some revenue, diversify the tax base, rather than some other types of businesses. We have to be wary of that. So that's where you have to look. And then in 12 years, we have the issue with Devon's. Excuse me if you heard the siren. And therefore, and 12 years is not that long a time. I mean, there's a lot of planning that has to go into effect with that. And we have to really consider whether that would be a viable asset to further diversify the tax base, raise revenue without raising property taxes, which just simply cannot go any higher. I mean, after the Proposition 2.5, 2018 Hildreth Elementary School, I mean, we have no place left to go. So we have to begin to diversify and try to get that 90% residential tax base lower. And that's very, very important. And that's the place to look right now in Devon's in 12 years. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. McBee.
It's such a difficult question. I mean, we rely so heavily on our residential tax base. You're both right. I mean, it's tough. I used to live in Texas and we didn't have income tax, but we had really high property taxes. Actually, the town I grew up in, pretty comparable to here. But it's amazing that it is because they have so much new growth in Plano, Texas and Richardson that you wouldn't think that it would be as high, almost as high as it is here in Austin, Texas, where we used to live too. It's amazing. But we're a small town. We want to stay a small town. And unfortunately, I think the tax, I don't know what to do with the taxes, except try to figure out how we can diversify the tax base we tried an ag bylaw that really, I think we should keep working on. The idea was exactly as Michael was speaking, as I spoke earlier, was to look at ways to increase the tax base and diversify it by allowing in even the ag and residential areas, a bed and breakfast or an Airbnb or farm to table restaurants. We struggled when we were developing that with, figuring out how to make sure we wouldn't increase traffic and, still need to work on that. And I think it should be worked on. Indian Hill Music Center is building a state-of-the-art facility in Groton. And I think we need to capitalize on the tourism that I really think this is going to generate. There's going to be, it's going to change, I think, the area. It's going to be like Tanglewood. So if there's any way that we can start working on this ag bylaw again, as we called it, or a tourism bylaw, there's so many bicyclists that come in here. If we could get people to come in here and visit our farms, maybe the farms or neighboring properties could have a bed and breakfast, and then we would get some tax revenue from that. Maybe we need to look at the room tax that had been looked at before a couple of years ago in line with that. The fiscal impact of the development of the C district is going to be looked at in that study. That's going to be the first piece of what the planning board is proposing. We also had a fiscal impact analysis done a few years ago. So you should look at that too to see how these things might be offset. Time's up.
Thank you. Next question. How can we expect to pay for large projects like the new senior center, fire station, DPW building, or any other large capital project in the future without a Proposition 2.5 debt exclusion? This says 1 minute. I'm not sure you can do it in 1 minute. You might, let's still stick with 2 on this one. Mr. Cabellas.
I think the answer is simple. You can't. I mean, you just simply can't. If you're going to develop those things, you're going to have to. So that's why, and I can't, and there's no place else to go. So, I don't see how you could. Again, we have to find ways to try to diversify the base, because you just simply cannot ask the homeowners in this town to carry more of the burden. I mean, between 2006 and 2016, the tax burden in this town increased by 40%. If that continues, I don't know where we go. I mean, I think that you're going to see home values decline. I think you're going to see this town become cost prohibitive. And I think that you're going to see equity deflation. When I was cleaning, when I participated in the town cleaning a couple of weeks ago, I ran into my new neighbor, and a great guy, and he moved, and he's an airline pilot, and he likes the proximity to Logan Airport. It's close enough, and he flies, and he loves the school system, and he bought a home, and I got to meet him, and he has a child in the same grade as my stepson, and we look forward to play dates. But I got to tell you, I mean, if we continue raising the taxes the way we're going to have to raise them to fund these projects, he's not moving here, and he's not, and he'll find someplace else to go. And the house that he bought is not going to sell for as high as it sold, and you're going to have this downward spiral. So, I mean, you just can't finance these capital projects on the backs of property owners. Now, how do you finance them? We have to find other ways. We have to try to diversify the tax base. We have to look at Devon's. We have to. I mean, we don't even have really. I think we have a AAA bond rating, but if we continue to borrow, that's going to potentially go down. I mean, because I believe right now we're at 10% or so of our threshold there. So these are some serious issues, but it just can't be put on the backs of property owners. It just simply can't.
Thank you, Mr. McLaughlin.
I don't have an answer for you on that. And part of that is because I am the new guy. I don't have the breadth of knowledge on what's been proposed in the past, what the deficit would be as a result of any of those improvements to the facilities and to the new ones as well. So, this is something I would like to look at more data for, and then making a judgment based on that. But I can't, agree that, you can't just pile on additional costs, even though I believe that we need to have a facilities management division put in place to help with some of this. We are a bedroom community, and there is very limited commercial sea space of which we can develop and diversify. So from the other perspective to Mr. Keblis's notion there, I don't actually see any of that actually being enough diversification and offset in order to spend any way that we want to. So we're going to have to be able to be very conservative and look at what it is that we want to invest in. And I do believe that first and foremost, it's to preserve what we have to date and make sure that we keep Harvard an icon that it is within this region. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. McBee.
Same answer, because I don't know that we can, and the question just disappeared off my screen, but we could seek grants. I mean, we did get some grants for some paving projects, which does free up some funds that the DPW would have otherwise had to have paid, out of the pocket, but we've already paid into the tax pocket that they have. And trying to find maybe some corporate sponsorship for the senior center, that's a challenge, but it could be something that, we could see if volunteers could help find some corporate sponsorship. We don't have a lot of businesses in town, but when they redid the new library, I guess I didn't redo it, but that used to be the high school, that new gorgeous library we had a great team of volunteers that were here before me, who managed to raise a lot of funds to make that the beautiful building that it is. So we need to try to learn from them and figure out how to do that again for maybe a new senior center or improving the senior center, the fire station. I mean, these are things we need. The fire station, that's a tough one. How do we not raise the taxes to get that? I'm not sure. I wish that there were still funds. I know after 9/11, there were funds for new police stations and fire stations. We got a new police station. We couldn't get both the fire station and police station. But I think looking for grants, trying to come up with some ideas. And I think it might be, we've already started as a town to give the seniors a bit of a break, seniors who are in need, on their tax bill. And maybe we need to expand that. Maybe we need to expand it to, people over a certain age and not just based on income. Or maybe it's, maybe we broaden it out to a higher level of income and assets than we have now to try to grow that senior program to reduce the real estate taxes on those seniors so that people can stay here. Thanks.
Thank you. Next question. How should the select board manage and hold the town administrator accountable? Mr. Mclaughlin.
Well, the charter dictates that, right? So the charter is our policy in which the select board defines their roles and responsibilities for the town administrator. This is not a flat organization. That it is effectively managed by the select board. My background is in policy and directives with Department of Defense. I oversaw government contracts, later became actually one of those government contractors who executed to the terms and conditions and the requirements of those contracts. And all of what we transact here with the town for ensuring that town halls managed and run, and then the contracts that they let and the services that are performed here for the town are very identical to what I've done in the past. And I see that as a town administrator being someone that is there daily to effectively administer for the town, but ultimately select board is the one who's going to dictate the policies, going to ensure that the compliance is met for the bylaws, and that everyone that has a stake in it has had a chance to be able to review, and when they haven't, pulls them in to do so for those things that they do have a stake in. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. McBee.
Thank you. That's a tough question. We do have the charter. The select board, it does oversee the town administrator, and they do an annual review. It would be nice if there was, and maybe there already is, but I don't remember hearing of any input being asked from the public for about the town administrator and how things are being run in the town. I know that he does receive a lot of comments, and he has recently opened up a free, well, before COVID, office hour where anybody could go in and go ask questions, which is nice. But I think if it was a more open process, if there's an annual review, I think there's only one member of the select board, if I recall, and another person, I think from the personnel board, I might have this wrong, but I believe that's how they do the review now. It might be helpful to have, maybe more members of the select board involved in that process, and, be more upfront with the public of what those parameters are that are being analyzed and assessed in that annual review. Maybe even taking more input from the public on, what we're rating on how the performance of the town administrator is going, when that review is done.
Thank you. Mr. Cabellis.
Yes, I think that the select board is, has ultimate oversight over the town administrator. And, I believe the 2018 charter sort of clarified some things. I believe the select board at the beginning of the year sets out sort of the goals and the objectives for the town. And I believe at town meeting, it's the select board that gives sort of a state of the town sort of summation to, what's the health, economically and otherwise of the town of Harvard. I was published in the press a few weeks back, and this question was posed to me, and I sort of made the reference to, the select board is almost you look at the town, and it seems kind of cold when you look at it this way, but you look at the town sort of like a corporation, and the town administrator is sort of the CEO, and the select board is sort of the board, but ultimately, it's sort of rigidly applied. That's sort of the framework, but obviously, we don't want to look at ourselves so coldly, but ultimately the ultimate authority resides with the select board. That's the elected officials with the town, by the people in direct democracy. And we have, we have accountability to the residents that live here. And so we have to make sure that the town administrator is doing his job. We also have to make sure that the town administrator has the resources to do his job. And I believe, an annual review to say, at the beginning of the year, the select board should outline sort of, what's our priorities for this year. And at the end of the year, there should be a review. Have those priorities been met? And if they haven't been met, why haven't they been met? And if corrective action needs to be taken, then it would. But ultimately, it is the responsibility of the select board to set the priorities, and then sort of the buck stops with us as the elected officials of the town. But certainly, we want to give the town administrator clear objectives, the resources to meet those objectives, the leeway to do so, and certainly not be over his shoulder. He's in charge of the day-to-day operation of the town, and then have an end of the year review and see how things went and take action if necessary. Thank you.
Thank you. And this is a follow-up to that question. How should the select board measure the town administrator's performance? And how will you respond if the performance is substandard? And that is for 1 minute, Ms. McBee.
I think, as I had said earlier, we need to outline it on the select board what the parameters are, what we're looking for from the town administrator. I didn't mention earlier, but we should also be asking personnel, to review him as well. It's a guy right now, so I say him. I'm pretty sure he identifies as a him, as well as, the other, stakeholders in town, the DPW director, and get feedback from everybody from different angles, as well as members of the public. That's, I think, one way we could review his performance. If his performance is substandard, I think that he needs to be held accountable in some way, whether it's that there'll be another, instead of an annual review, if things aren't up to snuff, maybe we do, a quarterly review. And if things still aren't up to snuff, I'm not sure where we would have to decide as a board, if I'm on the board, what we would do in that case. But that's how I would handle it.
Thank you. Mr. Cabellis.
I think the first question would have to ask is, why hasn't it been met? Why haven't the standards been met? Was the objectives made clear to the town administrator? Did the town administrator have the resources to meet those objectives? And if it is substandard, why is it substandard? Now, with respect to, what corrective action, should be taken, or if there's a substandard performance, what should we do? I mean, I have a small business myself. I have multiple employees. I find most people actually want to do the job. I mean, and you figure out really quickly if you have somebody who doesn't want to do the job. So, if it's not being met, we got to figure out why. And I do believe that, obviously some corrective action would have to be taken, remedial measures, and, maybe more resources be provided if necessary. But certainly, we'd have to have clear objectives and clear remedial action if the performance was not met, and maybe increased review. That would be my approach.
Thank you. Mr. Mclaughlin.
Yeah, so I believe that people are hired for a reason, right? They were identified to be matching candidates and vetted, and they're to be trusted to do the job of which we hired them to do. So when we say the select board has that power of that determination, can evaluate for themselves, and we've elected them to do so. And if they under their decision making have determined that the person's not fit, then that's within their charge to deal with. So as far as performance-based measures or anything like that, I don't think that's necessary. I would hate for something like that to then lead to us then seeing a town manager come in, and then more powers pulled away from our volunteer force. So I would like to keep it the way it is, and then just ensure that this is not a flat organization, that the select board makes this determination.
Thank you. Our next question. Do you think the town charter provides a strong enough system of checks and balances and provides for adequate segregation of duties for both those in volunteer government and those that work for the town? Mr. Cabellas, 2 minutes.
I think the town charter did provide further clarification. I think that it tried to have a structure with the select board being sort of the executive, the people at town meeting being sort of the legislators, and in a lot of delegation to the volunteer government with oversight. I mean, this town relies very, very heavily on volunteer government. I think that's a good thing. I think we want to try to encourage that as much as possible. I like volunteering for the town. I like being part of the historical commission. I like doing the things that I do. I think most everybody here does, and all my colleagues enjoy it. I think that we need a little bit more guidance, perhaps, as to what the objectives are from the elected officials in this town. In other words, sometimes we feel like we're sort of marooned and not sure sort of what is the select board or the planning board or other boards sort of looking for us, and we're kind of operating in a vacuum. I think they should, perhaps the town charter tried to address that. I think it could have done maybe a better job there. I think that we can work within the town charter to try to open those channels of communication. But I think that the segregations of duties for both those in volunteer government and for those elected officials, I mean, I think that's good, but ultimately, and I want to encourage that, and I think we need to rely on our volunteers. We want to continue to rely on our volunteers, but ultimately we have to get guidance from the elected officials in this town and from the elected people in this town, and we need to have feedback so that way the volunteers can actually do their job and do it effectively. Because in my experience, most people, practically everybody, wants to and does so willingly and is happy to do it. So I think that the charter provides a good framework, but I think we need to work within the charter for more more direct lines of communication and more clarity between the elected officials and the volunteer force that we rely on so much. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. McBee.
Thanks. I think the charter, it did provide a good framework, as you called it, Richard, but I don't know if it's been effectively followed yet. It's still so new. I remember that first year, I think that I was on planning board at the time, and I remember going to the budget meetings with the select board and the finance committee, and not everybody had really reread the charter. It passed, and all of a sudden it was a scrambling of how are we going to adjust everything here, So I think it's still being worked out, and it's still, I think, left to be determined if it did provide a strong enough system of checks and balances, because I don't think that it's been fully and effectively followed. That's a lot of F's. And I think that the select board was supposed to kind of guide the other towns and committees, the boards, on which direction to go on certain things. I think the select board and the town administrator, honestly, has been tasked with a lot of different things that they have to keep a handle on. It's been hard for them to do the additional duty of telling the other boards and committees what direction to go on. We do have the master plan that we use to guide us, based on what people have said they wanted, which is, a nice rural community that we maintain the character of. And if I get elected, I aim to try to steer, everything with the strategic plan that comes up every year to try to have some way of checking on those boards and committees periodically. I think that the select board has been trying to do that, but it's been kind of clunky so far. It did provide, like Richard said, a nice framework, and I think it might need some tweaks going forward. And I think that we should tweak it as we go forward and figure out what we like and what we don't like.
Thank you. Mr. McLaughlin.
Thank you. Well, I think it does. I think you have a charter that outlines roles and responsibilities for both the select board and administrator in this matter. It really comes down to the select board members and what they want to uphold from the charter. And if they need clarification for anything that's confused, to then go back to Ms. McBee's point and go back and update it and clarify it. If there are any issues that exist today because of the charter's inadequacies or anything, then it should be a charge of the select board to get it updated. Otherwise, it should be a document that the select board lives by and ensures that they're working with the town administrator and fulfilling those directives of it. Thank you.
Thank you. As a follow-up to that question, what revisions would you make to the town charter for 1 minute? Ms. McBee.
I don't particularly like that if I'm on the select board, maybe I'll change my mind. No, honestly, I won't. I don't like that the select board gets to choose all of the volunteers, or has to choose is probably more apt. All of the volunteers for many of the boards and committees in town. It's really hard to recruit new volunteers. And I think that some people are, there's only 5 people on the select board and we don't know everybody in town. And there's a lot of constituencies that aren't represented, on the select board in town. It could be, parents of really young children, because we have 2 people vying for that today. But it just makes it that much harder to make sure that those boards and committees can be staffed with the volunteers that should be on there, when you only have 1 board that's having to put everybody on there. So I would change that and bring back some elections for some positions instead of putting it all in select board to find volunteers.
Thank you. Mr. McLaughlin.
None yet. I'll wait to be elected first to tell you. but to go to the point on select board choosing the volunteers, I would like that. I would like to make sure that we're filling in seats and then getting diversity within our volunteer force, and making sure that we're getting fresh people in. So I would actually like to be a part of that. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Cabellas.
Yeah, I think one of the revisions is, I believe the town charter calls for review within 10 years, if I'm correct on that. I think that review, was created in 2018. It was sort of morphed and, it provided this sort of constitutional structure for the town with sort of a separation of powers. I think that it should be sort of brought up for review sooner than within the 10-year period. I think that it, gave a little bit, in some instances, I think gave a little too much power to the select board, and maybe should have delegated some of that power elsewhere. But I think that 10 years is an awful long time to begin looking at that document again. And maybe we want to. I think it's a really good starting point. I think it's a really good framework. I think it tries to provide clarity, but I think it needs to be fine-tuned, like most instruments that are of that nature that are drafted. And I think that a sooner sort of review and maybe some amendments and revisions rather than that long period would be in the interest of the town.
Thank you. Our next question. How can the select board ensure that all town departments take the environmental climate impact into account in purchasing, policy, land maintenance, building maintenance, etc.? For 1 minute. Mr. McLaughlin.
That's the charge of the select board to do just that. So the how is making sure that number one, the select board has that face to face knowledge of each of these boards, committees, and so forth, and knows how to reach across to them and to pull in, even if they're matrixed and they don't communicate very often. Realize that they need to be pulled in, and that it's essential that we have environmental climate impact to basically anything we do, especially nowadays with global climate change. And I see the select board having to be very communicative in that mindset and those things. So I think it's essential. And there's more than enough volunteers out there that have a mindset and are interested in this to make sure that they that they play a role and provide the inputs that are needed to be effective in order to keep the impact mitigated. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Cabellas.
I would say buy green. I mean, it should be the policy of the town, if it's not already the policy of the town, that whenever practical and whenever possible, procure green, renewable energy. If a vehicle is going to be updated, you want it to be, if you can, electric or hybrid. I mean, it should be the policy of this town. Obviously we have to consider economic factors, but we got to buy green. I mean, I think it should be a top priority of the town to procure from green renewable energy sources and renewable energy providers. And I think there's one of the other things I think that the select board should encourage is that there's a lot of grant money out there for green. So I think that we should maybe have, I don't know, of a separate board, or really be proactive trying to have, grant writers, try to get grants for solar, get grants for green, get grants for renewable. There's a lot of federal money out there. There's a lot of state money out there. And I think we really, really need to be proactive, but buy green and try to get green through grants. That should be two top priorities of the town.
Thank you. Ms. McBee.
We do have a lot of wonderful volunteers in town, like the Lighters and others, and I'm sorry that I'm forgetting everybody's name, who have worked hard on getting grants like that, which has been very helpful in the past for solar for the elementary school. So there were some folks who worked really hard to get the solar on the new school. It was quite a challenge. I know that the school committee did try to, have that factored into that building, but the cost was so high, but we managed to find some grants. So grants are really the key. We have our community and economic development director position that the charter created. So he has been tasked with that, and he does run the climate resiliency action group, I believe is the name. I'm probably getting it wrong. We also have the HEAC group. We have a couple of groups in town who work on these issues. Every department is supposed to take into account, the effect of the purchasing decisions, just a matter of making sure that's happening. Maybe when the select board reviews the budget, kind of making sure that that is happening.
Thank you. This will be our final question before we go to closing statements. The select board recently voted to endorse a town diversity statement. What steps would you support to implement the values articulated in the statement? Mr. Cabellas.
Thank you. Well, let me say first that the Harvard IC welcomes all, regardless of color, creed, and identity. And whereas I have absolutely no opposition to a statement encouraging tolerance, acceptance, and equality, I believe that, and I certainly would support a statement to that effect. I believe that what that statement does is simply reiterate what Harvard is and what Harvard always has been. I believe that we move here and we live here because this is a tolerant community. We accept all people of all walks of life, of all religions, of all races, of all creeds and genders and identities. And I think that a town statement to that effect, sure, I would certainly encourage that, but I would also, indicate that I believe that that would just simply be providing government imprimatur to what really has already existed and has existed. So I think it's nice to have that statement, but I think we as individuals see a welcoming and open community, and that's why we moved here, and that's why we want to preserve that, and that's what that's my views on with respect to that issue.
Thank you, Mr. Mclaughlin.
Yeah, I think it's lovely. I mean, it's simply making an affirmation that we're equals, and that we as elected officials and conduct ourselves as such, right? That we treat everybody that way. So I support this fully. I mean, I may be a shaved, white-headed, veteran with a law enforcement and defense past, But I mean, I'm basically see myself fully as a candidate of diversity, regardless of race, religion, or how people self-identify. And Black Lives Matter. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. McBee.
I would like to see the town work more on affordable housing. It's been a challenge for this town because we do have a requirement from the state that we have more affordable housing. The governor has been pushing forward a lot of new rules to make it easier for more housing to be developed in the state. And we need to we need to diversify our town. I wish that it wasn't, you wonder when you move up to the Northeast from Texas, why are there no people of color in Maine and Vermont? Well, that's because Maine and Vermont, and I know Oregon in the past, there were some communities in those states and in our state in Groton where people were physically told to leave in very strong terms. So it's really important to have this statement come to the select board because it kind of shows to the world that we are truly welcoming and we're trying to rectify, the past acts. I don't know if Harvard was a sunset town, but I know Groton was, and I think it's really important to send that signal out there. I know of people of color who moved out of this town because of the treatment of their children, and it breaks my heart. And I try to get people to move here that I meet outside the community, but unfortunately we have a reputation, and I think that having this statement issued from the select board was a good first step.
Thank you. So that brings us to closing statements. And before we get to that, I just want to thank all the candidates for your participation, for running, because democracy works best when people exercise it, and for participating tonight, as well as thanking all the folks who are watching and who will watch later on. So you have 1 minute for closing statements. Ms. McBee.
Thank you. Thank you so much to the League and the Harvard Press. This is so great that this debate is happening during all of this pandemic. I'm so glad for the volunteers who have managed to run this tonight and record it so that people can watch it at their leisure, which I do not want to see myself on camera again. But anyway, and in closing, I'm a longtime resident of Harvard, local business owner, committed town volunteer with a passion to preserve our town's unique community feel and character. And I'm eager to serve on this board after all the knowledge and everything I did on the planning board and so much learning that I base all the stuff I learned, all the reports I've read. While it's fresh in my mind, I'd like to serve on the select board to continue that growth. Over the next 3 years, the police chief is going to be retiring. We're going to have to address senior housing, so many things. And I'd really like to just hit the ground running on the select board. And please don't forget to vote 3 to 8. It's only open 3 to 8. The polls are only open 3 to 8 on the 18th. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cavellis.
Thank you. And I'd like to thank again, the League of Women Voters for hosting this tonight. I'd like to thank the residents of Harvard who are watching right now. I ask for your vote on May 18th. Let me just say that if I'm elected, I believe I've set out a clear vision. I believe I've set out a clear vision for what the obstacles are that face this town and some ways to address them. Now, certainly these ways are not going to solve all our problems, but it's a good first step, identifying the problem and begin to take corrective action. I can tell you if I'm elected, I hope to form consensus, but I'm not going to go along to get along. I have my principles and I have my convictions. I stand by them, and I believe that they're right for the town. And I certainly will, I want to form consensus. I think that government works best when there is consensus. I hope we can, and I believe a town works best when people are collaborative and compromise and are able to come together. But I won't go along to get along. I have a clear vision, and I want to invoke it. And I hope you elect me. And I thank you very, very much for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Mclaughlin.
I'd like to thank the press, the league, and everyone who's volunteered to support and coordinating and putting this together, and everyone watching tonight. Thank you very much for your interest and your love in this town. And I'd like to just close with stating that the reason I'm involved in here today is, number one, what got me interested in driving to basically purchase a place here and move my family to Harvard, not very far away. Because we love this town so much, and that will be first and foremost on my mind, and everything that I would do as a select board member is preserving what makes Harvard special. Granted, there are going to be vast challenges that, as far as for diversification for tax revenues and what happens with the air road and so forth. But first on my mind will be preserving what I think and from what all of you have told me is important to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Now I believe Meg is coming back. You're on mute, Meg.
All right, so that was just great. I really appreciate everybody's time. I wish the candidates very good luck for the election coming up. A recording of this forum will appear on harvardcabletv.com by sometime tomorrow afternoon. The annual town meeting, please don't forget, it's this Saturday, May 15th, under the big top on the hockey field in front of the library. And don't forget, thank you, Erin, for the PSA about voting. Vote of the town elections on Tuesday, May 18th from 3 to 8 in the Bromfield cafeteria. In addition to in-person voting, you still have 24 hours to request a mail-in ballot. Closes at 5 p.m. May 12th. Visit Town Hall website for details on that. The League wants to thank all of the candidates for their time and effort tonight. We want to thank Harvard Cable TV and especially Brittany Blaney Anderson for hanging in there with us and for all your help in streaming the forum and sharing their Zoom account. So I want to wish you all a good evening. Thank you very much.